Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live webcast to launch HLB's Global Service Business Leaders 2021. I am Leslie Warnoon, and I'm here today with HLB CEO Marco Donzelli, as well as HLB's Coco Liu, Chief Regional Officer for Asia Pacific, Ralph Mitchison, Global Real Estate and Construction Leader and Partner based here in the UK, and Marianne Keller, Partner of our Los Angeles-based firm in the US. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Leslie.
So, over the last few weeks of 2020, our team at HLB has surveyed nearly 600 senior business executives from across 55 countries to better understand what they are focusing on to survive and to build opportunities for growth in 2021. The research that we conducted took place between September and November last year via online and telephone interviews. And in addition to our quantitative research, we've also conducted a number of in-depth CEO interviews over video conferencing. And the main aim for our research this year was to better understand what business leaders are doing to drive growth and recovery from the events of 2020. Thinking about what kind of role technology capabilities play within their plans, but also looking at the human side of things. So, for example, as the coronavirus has exposed inequalities in society, what are business leaders doing to embed more diversity and equality programs that potentially help the impact and business performance? And of course, what are they doing to rebound from 2020 and plan to build back better for the new year? So before I hand over to Marco, just a quick note to our audiences to say that if you have any questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen to post them. We will be leaving some time at the end of the session to get to your questions. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter using our campaign hashtag and @mention, which you will see appear on the screen in just a second. And we will continue the conversation on our social media channels. Now, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Marco to take us through the findings of our survey and how business leaders are navigating the current crisis.
Thank you very much, Leslie, and hello everyone. So this is certainly a crisis that we are all living that made us think not only about our health, the health of our families, but also about the knock-on effect for businesses and for the economies in general. Plus the frightening fact that the pandemic has actually exposed the vulnerability of many aspects of our world and in general of many business models. Business leaders have been facing, in fact, unprecedented conditions over the last 12 months. Maybe the only term of paragon is the Second World War, which is very far away now. Last year, economic uncertainty in the last year's survey that we ran ranked as their number one threat of business leaders. This year, however, their concerns about economic uncertainty has risen even further by an additional 10 percentage points. However, the continued consequences of what we are living of COVID-19 have now become the top concern for business leaders, with an incredible 38%, of course, stating that they are very concerned about the pandemic, not what happened so far, but what is going to happen in the future. If you think that we, are in a situation where vaccines are being distributed, this is definitely worrying. These two risks overshadow the other ones, which are also up from last year, specifically geopolitical uncertainty and disruption to international trade flows. And both are quite, I would say, significant risks as well. Over 50% are concerned about the future impact of regulatory changes as well, which could further increase as markets and trading blocks continue to fragment, creating even more complexity for companies. Most notably, business leaders are increasingly worried about another aspect that we were not used to, as at least in a large part of the world, is social instability, which has now risen from the 11th biggest concern last year to the top 5 concerns this year. I don't have to mention what we, the world that we are living, but an example is clearly what we saw recently in the US, which is very unprecedented. Overall, the results from the survey show high level of concern among a mix of, let's say, several risks to businesses this year. But there are, of course, some surprises that we will share later.
Thank you, Marco. Yes. I suppose that in the current environment, it is not surprisingly that we've seen certain risks to business are being perceived as higher and more concerning. Yet what was surprising in our findings is that actually we found that CEO confidence still remains quite high. Can you share your views on that?
Yes, thank you, Leslie. Of course, the pandemic has had a pretty negative impact on economic growth and related prospects for businesses across, I would say, most industries. Of course, there are some winners, but in general, it has had a pretty negative impact. Our research confirms this, with more than half of the leaders we surveyed expecting the rate of global growth to decline this year. Of course. However, at the same time, more than 75% of executives in our survey say that they are confident that in their own ability to grow their businesses, including over 20% who indicated that they are very, very confident. So that is really surprising, considering all the points that we mentioned earlier and the situation that we are all living, the results of the risk rating and so on. And then we get this confidence, which of course puts some optimism into all of us. Some companies, of course, are well positioned for the disruption. They shifted business models. Some are naturally ready. Some started actually, with new models, completely new models this year, and this made them more confident of course, for the future. It was somewhat, let's say, an occasion to scratch the past and start something good, something new and good. So another aspect also I wanted to share is that it's geographical. US leaders are almost twice as likely to be outsourcing a function than those in China or in the US. That's also something that I saw. But in general, that is more or less the perspective that I've seen from this survey.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, you already mentioned the differences in geographies, and that when we look at our survey data from regional perspectives, that we found some interesting differences there. If I turn to our panelists, Coco, maybe I can start with you. We found that the results, particularly in China, were quite different from those in the West.
Yes, thank you, Leslie. Yeah, there's no doubt that the business leaders around the globe are facing same challenges posed by the pandemic and economic uncertainty. But what is interesting is more evident in business leaders based in the East, that's China, Vietnam, and Korea. China is the first country exposed to the worst of the pandemic. However, business leaders in China are actually the least concerned about the impact of COVID-19 and the economic uncertainty. Based on our study, more than 80% of global business leaders are concerned about the pandemic, but the number in China is over 10 percentage points less. Economic uncertainty is the concern to 83% of global business leaders, but just over 6% of their Chinese peers share the same worry. I think the confidence in Chinese business leaders is in line with the fact that China is currently the only country successfully reversed the impact of COVID-19 on its economy, despite of the decline in the first quarter of 2020. the Chinese economy achieved a positive growth in the rest of the year. So 83% of Chinese business leaders are also confident in growth prospects of their own organizations in the coming 12 months. And they are indeed more confident than their global peers, as only 76% of them share the same positive thought. However, more Chinese business leaders expect the rate of global economic growth to decline in the coming year. Perhaps this is based on the comparison of China's COVID success and how other countries are handling the crisis at this moment, and also the comparison of a growth from a stable and a large domestic market in China and the ongoing geopolitical uncertainties such as the impact of Brexit and the leadership change in the US.
Yes, very interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Coco. Marianne, by contrast, in the US, the business leaders are actually the most optimistic about their expectations for global growth rates, with just 37% expecting growth rates to decline. What's your take on that? Why do you think in the US we see greater levels of optimism?
It's a really interesting question, Leslie, and I would say some might say that perhaps culturally we may be a bit more bullish in general. But also I would say that there have been, as Marco had mentioned, some unexpected opportunities to pivot and innovate, which many have found created lasting improvement. So I think that bullish perspective may in fact come from that as well. For example, some would say a crisis is also a good opportunity for entrepreneurs. And frankly, for those with an entrepreneurial mindset within organizations, which we call intrapreneurs. One of the CEOs that we interviewed is LA-based Gail Becker, who is the founder and CEO of food brand Cauliflower. And in that interview, the way that Gail put it was to say that there are so many problems and challenges in society today, but it's actually a good time to start a business if you have a business plan to help tackle some of those issues. So that's an interesting perspective, and I think perhaps sums up a great entrepreneurial mindset in that quote. From an operational perspective, both US and UK executives are concentrating on the following top 3 priorities: improving efficiency, reducing costs, and building organic growth. And finally, the survey tells us US leaders are almost twice as likely to be outsourcing a function than those in China and UK. And I think Marco touched on that. So I'm curious, from a UK perspective and elsewhere, Ralph, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Marianne. Yes, I mean, I see the same amongst my clients in the UK. One of the areas UK leaders appear to focus on more so than their global peers is brand strength, which ranks 3rd as a weakness that they plan to strengthen in the coming year. Perhaps related, UK business leaders seem less confident in their ability to grow their business than their global peers, with nearly 1 in 3 stating that they're not confident. That does, of course, mean 66% are still confident. But actually, when interpreting that, what we should do is have a look at when the survey was taken, because the survey was taken in October, November time, and around that time, the UK hadn't secured a Brexit deal with the EU, and there wasn't positive news about vaccines coming out then. So it's perhaps not entirely surprising that UK business leaders are less optimistic than their global peers.
Yeah. Thank you, Ralph, and Coco and Marianne. It's very interesting to see the regional differences in our data. Of course, one thing that we saw they all had in common was that technology was a key enabler for business continuity last year. And in our survey, we explored how business leaders are relying on different types of technology and technology capabilities in order to grow and to recover. Marco, I know technology is a topic close to your heart. Would you like to take us to our findings on technology?
Of course, I mean, the first question we need to ask ourselves is where would we be without technology now?
Exactly.
So we would have gone back probably 20 years. So thanks to technology. In our research last year, we did explore the importance of investing in technology to improve, how to work together in general and create better business agility. At that time, we did know that technology, of course, was important. We pushed a lot on cloud and other areas, but we didn't know about the pandemic. It was just coming. We didn't know that. So what happened afterwards proved actually that investments in technology are actually even more important now, even more critical. It's not just a plus, but it's critical for survival. Just for example, cloud is now considered the most important technology for future success, as from what the business leaders tell us, with around half of the business leaders, ranking this as a first priority. Then, of course, there are other areas as well that are very important, as they point out. Of course, they're all very, very interconnected, and sometimes they are in the same thing. So artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, and human augmentation. It is not the case that, in fact, all together, or most of them together, these technologies did support, our businesses this year remotely, and they're not going to disappear. And they are the reasons why we are still running and why we need to hope for a good future. Also, it's very interesting to note that 88% of the executives that we surveyed believe that technology is a key enabler to resolving or overcoming cross-border business challenges. If you think about, for example, working cross-border, what will we do without the collaboration tools? That's just like the easiest examples. But there could be many. And of course, you need to consider, of course, that digital capabilities are also ranked as one of the highest areas of weakness, which need to be addressed over the next 12 months. Actually, the area with considered as of highest weakness. So that's something that we need to work on. And I think maybe this year we actually have a different perspective than from the past. Now we are more able to see these weaknesses compared to previous years because of what happened, of course.
Also, when we looked at the findings in the technology section of the survey, specifically for China, we actually found some differences there compared to global. For example, digital capabilities, while ranked a weakness globally, are not ranked as high a weakness in China, for example. What's your take on that?
Yes, there are indeed differences in how business leaders in different regions are deploying technology. For instance, the global business leaders ranked the top 5 most important technologies as a cloud comes first, followed by AI, robotic process automation, IoT, and machine learning. However, business leaders in China, they have a slightly different list. AI comes on top, but then followed by IoT, cloud, 5G, and blockchain. This ranking is in line with the widely used 5G technology in China and the very advanced AI and IoT supported e-commerce and logistics services. As 5G and the cloud technology are viewed as infrastructure to be developed by the government, the business leaders actually tend to focus more on business level implementation of technologies. As you mentioned, what is also very interesting is that the Chinese business leaders seems to be more confident in their digital capabilities compared with global peers, as only 20% of them acknowledge the weakness, and half of them are focusing on improving their ability of innovation. As the early recovery in China has already provided business longer runway to be more proactive to explore future growth.
Thank you, Coco. That's very interesting indeed. Just as a quick reminder for our audience, if you have any questions for our panelists, to please post them in our Q&A box. And of course, you can also join the conversation via Twitter. Speaking of how we use technology in our private lives, I think where would we all have been without like Zoom happy hours and WhatsApp and staying connected with everyone through things like lockdown. However, what we also found is that, you know, technology cannot replace like real human interaction. And this is actually something we asked about as well, and Ralph and Unite discussed in the past. We asked business leaders about what they are coping, how they are coping with remote working, and how they are deploying the human touch at a distance. And we found that there were some difficulties there, weren't there?
Thanks, Leslie. Yes, there certainly were. I mean, digital platforms have saved many businesses, as the pandemic has demonstrated. However, digital platforms have also introduced new and different challenges for us. 84% of leaders agreed that it's been difficult to foster the human touch in times of social distancing or remote working. The ability to collaborate with colleagues and clients is the most missed, selected by over half of business leaders. Establishing trust, fostering creativity, showing empathy are all mentioned as difficult to foster through digital technology, as well as spontaneity. So I think a good example is we're all missing that water cooler, coffee machine chat, where perhaps we just have a chat with our colleagues and get to know them a bit better. Or also sometimes you say, you know, how are you getting on? And I've got a real problem. And the colleague you're speaking to says, well, have you thought of this? And you go away and you that's a solution for you. So we're missing those moments. You don't get that through digital platforms. I really feel for the younger generation that are just starting out at work, they can't benefit from networking events. They can't go to after work social events and get to know their colleagues, and they're not sitting in an environment where they can work hand to hand with their more knowledgeable colleagues. So it's how we all, however, everyone on this call, I'm sure, develop their careers, which is actually learning from those more experienced than us. That's just not happening. Many of the leaders we spoke to felt incredibly lucky that their businesses had managed to survive the pandemic so far, but they did expect to see a decline in business development, which again is harder to develop new business relationships over digital technology. From in-depth interviews, CEOs found business development and sales teams were especially affected. On the positive side, 65% of leaders agreed that it would be easier to source and manage diverse talent through online working, where geographical location is less of a constraint. So I guess that's a benefit to remote working. And talent acquisition was the third most critical area targeted by business leaders for improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the missing element of real life interaction is something that came across quite strongly in our CEO interviews, Ralph, as you mentioned, and it has put a greater emphasis on HR departments and chief people officers, who we've also seen shifted our focus in the past 12 months. For example, like physical as well as mental well-being became a top concern. And as the pandemic has continued to expose social inequalities and vulnerabilities, this is actually something that has risen on the agenda. Marianne, I know that this is a topic that's very close to your heart, and we had a couple of questions and interesting findings around diversity and equality topics in our survey. So would you mind taking us through those?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. I think that the study sure did have some interesting findings. And overall, I think what it's telling us is that we see the connection between diversity of thought, background, and experience cannot be uncoupled from the strong business results that leaders are looking for. We see in our own business as our competitors become more and more tech-enabled, we begin to question what differentiators we can put in competing with our competition. So it's great to see that the recognition that diversity of talent is a clear differentiator. How? So unpacking that a little bit, diverse individuals and their thinking brings the edge that leaders are increasingly seeking to drive innovation and drive speed of execution. Top organizations demand that, so they cannot avoid focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Unpacking it further from what the survey is showing us, it's no wonder that 85% agree that building diversity at the board level and also with the workforce is increasingly important. 82% of leaders we surveyed agree that a more diverse and inclusive workforce will ultimately improve their financial performance. We know that, but it's interesting to see that those leaders are recognizing it as well. Last summer, our HLB study into unconscious bias awareness looked deeper into the value of diversity in the workforce, specifically within the accounting profession. And it's reassuring to see that the findings here match up with that study and are echoed in terms of business leaders we surveyed across a broad variety of sectors telling us the same thing. So especially considering the worrying events and social unrest that we're seeing here in the US, as was mentioned before. So a few things that I think add on to that, given the current environment. COVID-19 has exposed that there are social inequities, and business leaders are focused on supporting and retaining talent. So given the importance of staff retention, combined with the challenges of remote working, some of which were already mentioned, Ralph talked about, you know, the enablement of technology, it's not surprising that a large 93% of business leaders agreed that staff physical and mental well-being is a top priority. So in addition, an impressive 93% again of business leaders believe it's more important than ever to ensure equal support and opportunities for all their people. So, you know, this is something I think that we all deeply care about and strive for. And finally, a strong employer brand will be critical. 91% of leaders believe that how they respond to events that impact society reflects on their brand.
Thank you, Marianne. Yes, I think these high numbers are definitely very positive and reassuring, and especially the link between diversity and the business performance I thought was a very interesting finding from the survey this year. Staying in the positive numbers, there's further evidence to support the idea that business leaders are genuine about their attempts to building back better. I think it's a term that we've heard quite a lot. Marco and Ralph, may I ask you to share some findings in this section?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. I mean, it's natural to expect that most business leaders are focusing on increasing their resilience in order to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on their operations. With an initial focus on survival, 65% of business leaders are planning to improve their operational efficiency. And cash flow has proved to be so critical for survival in the short and medium term. Reducing costs is their second most critical strategic priority, planned by over half of the executives. So whilst these are defense measures, or once these defense measures continue to dominate in 21, we're seeing that some business leaders are preparing for growth. So 42% are concentrating on launching new products and services in the next 12 months. 27% are planning new joint ventures or strategic alliances, and 21% are planning to collaborate with entrepreneurs.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
I think this is a great sign of positive and forward thinking, and that's what we need in this moment. Of course, we tend to adapt and find solutions to problems as human beings. So we are trying to find solutions now for the future. So we shouldn't forget also how positive our respondents are in terms of their own growth prospects. So a stunning 75% of leaders remain confident in their ability to grow, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session. I find this is very, very encouraging. Despite the challenging conditions for commerce in general, over 90% of leaders are also confident in their ability to successfully steer the business in a new direction, to shift the business in response to the impact of COVID-19. These are very, very positive numbers indeed, considering the circumstances. But I would say that there appears to be more of a resetting mechanism going on rather than slimlining for more efficient and effective operations going forward. Responding to the events which impact on society and the planet is not only something positive for brand perception. 77% of leaders see the business recovery process as a real opportunity to make changes to their businesses in order to profit for example, in the low carbon economy of the future. So this is a drastic, radical change. It's not like slimlining. It's really something different. So, and an even greater proportion, I have to say, of the leaders based in China, 89%, are already making changes to profit from the low carbon economy for the future. So, and this is great because it touches on another element that every business should have, not in the future, but now.
Yeah, Marco, that's very interesting. In last year's survey, 40% of leaders had plans to bring their sourcing strategies closer to home. This year, 59% are reassessing their supply chains to source closer to home. That could be because increased concerns over geopolitical tensions, potential trade flow disruption, protectionism, climate change risks, in addition to social pressures, could all be factors forcing people to rethink their supply chains.
Yeah, absolutely. And the pressure for greener is not only coming from consumers, if you think so. There are, of course, circumstances that make it easier now. But in general, global asset managers representing trillions of dollars of investments are also asking businesses to reduce carbon emissions now and improve the sustainability of assets in general. So, for example, when looking at sector segmentation in our data set, we see that investing in low carbon economy is basically the highest, 88% among financial services business leaders. So this is significant. And if you look at the agriculture sector, which is, I would say, like one of the major, if not the major contributor to greenhouse gases, we equally see higher averages among business leaders investing in low carbon opportunities. So this is the time. This is the time we don't need to let it go. We need to start, implementing what we have been thinking about for years. This is the time to do so. And I personally find these findings reassuring, as I believe reversing climate change before it's too late is, it's crucial. The next crisis will come from that otherwise. We don't want that. We don't need another crisis like this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marco and Ralph. And these numbers are incredible, especially considering the challenging times that we're in and the optimism that we're seeing. And I can't help but wonder, do you think that some of these numbers that we're seeing is rather wishful thinking, perhaps?
Well, I see what you mean, Leslie. So, I think, however, that in the light of the rollout of the COVID vaccines all over the world, wishful thinking, has to become a reality. And it's becoming a reality at some point, at least, soon. We can already see the effects on the stock markets. Of course, it depends on the day, it depends on the news, it depends on the situation, but you can see that there have been an impact from the vaccines positive news on the stock markets already visible. However, we do expect business leaders to plan for future bumps as well in the road. Some aspects will be appearing as predominant this year, and there will be some difficult times, and we know that. But let's say that we identify in our report 5 areas of caution where high expectations might need to be challenged. So you can actually take a look at our reports. I don't want to disclose everything now, so that you can actually have a good read. But I would like to take this opportunity, maybe ask our panelists on their thoughts on the potential challenges which business leaders might face, and the tough questions they should ask themselves in preparation for these challenges. And of course, if there are also some examples you'd be willing to share, I think it would be great for the audience.
Okay, Marco, shall I kick that one off? I mean, I think inevitably the first point I'd like to raise would be cash flow, because I think as we're coming out of the pandemic, there may be more bumps in the road, and I think people really need to test the robustness of their forecasts and their ability to adapt the cash flow model to cope with bumps in the road going forward. Also, I would be reviewing my post-pandemic strategy and look to see whether I've incorporated the things we've learned during the pandemic. So have we brought in all the upside into our future plans? I think I'd also what we'd hope businesses many businesses have contracted. So I think one thing I would certainly be looking at is my access to resource as we need to gear up. So I think if I was a business, should be having a look at that and saying, as demand starts to come back in our business, have we got access to the talent that we need to satisfy that demand? That's another area, as a specialist subject of mine, is certainly use of office space and getting staff ready to return to work. Staff have got used to working from home. They've saved the travel costs, they've saved the travel time, and in fact, to be more productive in many cases. But we are going to return to offices at some time in a different way. So I think we need to have a strategy looking forward to cover how we're going to deal with going back to work in the post-pandemic world, and what will our office space look like.
Ralph, you said it well. I think we all deserve a T-shirt that says "You're still on mute." I survived 2020, but I think, when I think about the things that you just mentioned, I think about how much of 2020 initially was spent on business survival, right? A lot of our clients were really focused on what do I need to do quickly to pivot, to adapt, and how can I survive? But we started really quickly across HLB with our clients in talking about the resiliency journey. Because even if clients were still to some degree in survival mode, they needed to be thinking ahead and planning for how that will take them into the future. We're finding that those that did are feeling really grateful that they did, because now they're better positioned to start to implement some of those ideas and think about things like going from operations, operational efficiency, operational sustainability, to strategy around growth and increasing shareholder value. Some of the things that we're talking about are how has the pandemic created new sector opportunities? I think we've seen for our business focused very heavily in entertainment. Of course, what kind of an LA-based organization would we be if we didn't have an entertainment practice? But so many of the studios and so many of the entertainment businesses have learned to adapt because a lot of the experiential events could not occur, right? Movie theaters, things like that. So a lot of the innovation and adaptation around creating new ways of doing business. And food and beverage is another sector that, of course, has been so heavily hit around the world, those that are in that business have found that some of the greatest innovations have occurred. And I think also technology around purchasing options, a lot of website and technology upgrades around how are we creating opportunities for the client experience or the customer experience to be elevated at this time and going forward.
Thanks, Ralph and
Thank you,
Marianne, for sharing your thoughts. And we talked about the involvement of a strategy for recovery. And because of the pandemic, many governments are becoming more inward-looking. And some people say that the world is shifting away from globalization. So if the future international collaborations are based more on the trust and shared value, rather than trade and finance, as business leaders, perhaps you can ask some questions like, are you prepared to reposition your business in the new international environment? And are you keeping your options open? So for instance, just take an example, because of the trade war between US and China, and at the beginning of last year, some businesses are thinking about, shall we move our supply chain out from China? And the people can also anticipate that perhaps the Chinese trade, especially export, will be hit hard. And also this will impact on the foreign investment into China. But the reality is that in November last year, Chinese export increased by 20%, which is the highest growth rate since 2018. And the Chinese stock market hit a 13-year high just 2 weeks ago. So as a business leader, if you are still thinking about optimizing your supply chain and reducing costs, are you prepared to reposition yourself in the new context? And also, are you keeping your options open?
I agree, Coco, and I think supply chain is such an important and interesting concept because I think practically speaking, across the globe, folks had to figure out how to replace those materials or ingredients that were no longer available to them because of the pandemic, and then got kind of used to that new way of doing it. And so that does create some kind of constriction. But I think, you know, again, maybe this is the bullish US-based person in me to say this, but I also think that if you think about the last pandemic in 1918, it was followed by the Roaring 20s. So not to be corny and end on an optimistic note, I think that what we may find on the other side of this will be folks that are really eager to embrace expansion and big ideas and going back to some exciting things that that we haven't been able to do recently.
Yes. Coco, Marianne, on the topic of supply chain, we're actually getting quite a few questions from the audience, which is great. Keep them coming. And I actually just had a question pop up on supply chain. So if you don't mind, I would like to direct it to you. So the question is, have you had any feedback with regards to sustainability of supply chain? That's an area that the pandemic has shown caused a serious disruption. And what are your views on having a strategy to be better prepared on this for the future?
Sorry, can you repeat the last sentence? Because I got some delay here.
So, the question is, in regard to supply chain, if we had any feedback on sustainability of supply chain, since the pandemic has shown that this is an area that's been disrupted for many businesses, and what our views are in terms of strategy for better preparing for the future in regard to supply chain.
Okay. So again, I'm reflecting then back to the Chinese case, also in relation to the COVID success. I think in 2020, why China has been done so well in terms of export and the supply chain is what if in the whole world only the factories in China can guarantee that they can run at a full capacity, and they can deliver those goods on time. I think this is also down to how China has been dealing with the pandemic and the faster response. But what is more important is that what happened when people are free to move again and the life is back to normal. So I think the lockdown is just the beginning, but how to achieve the economic recovery, I think is more on the is after the lockdown stage. And I think for business, it's important to leave the options open. And there are so many unexpected factors. For instance, like the export figure in China is actually beating the expectation. No one expected that there's actually an increase of China's export. And so I think for business leaders, you do need to have a comprehensive view about the geopolitical factors and also the following the trends as well. So I don't know if Marianne, you would like to add anything?
Yeah, the only other thing I would add to that, Coco, is I think depending on the sector, we know that consumer demand is frankly what drives so many business decisions, right? Regardless of what the business is capable of doing. So I think we're so used to a borderless world, and technology to some extent has reinforced that. It's allowed us to continue to operate that way, despite the fact that supply chain has been so affected during the pandemic. I believe that, as you said, once the opportunities and the options are opened up, consumer demand will be, to a great degree, the thing that dictates what choices that we want to make and how businesses will respond accordingly. I
would like to add, I think that yes, of course, the China paradigm that Coco was explaining is definitely compelling. But on the top of that, I think we need to go even beyond that. So companies do need to have a robust supply chain to manage this disruption in the future. What does robust mean? So I think this is an occasion to the proper risk assessment and mitigation plans for the future, and create more efficient supply chains, smarter, more technology, and more sustainable. So this is the response that we need to put in place, that businesses need to put in place for the future. I think there will be in the back of the mind of many people that pandemics can now happen and other events can happen, and we need to be prepared for this so that we don't have to stop. We can go ahead.
Yeah, and I think learning that there needed to be a plan B has caused organizations to have a plan B at the ready going forward.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I mean, the pandemic has shown that where you're reliant on distant supply, you may not get your products through. So that stops production in your local country. So local production is not only greener, but potentially less disrupted. So, but I suspect the economics of costs will come into play as well. So as Marianne said there, it's a plan B, isn't it? Having it as a plan B in case this happens again.
Yeah. Thank you all. I have a couple more questions that our audience has put forward. This one, Ralph, maybe you want to take it, as we spoke about this a little bit earlier. And it is about cybersecurity and the perceived risk of cybersecurity. So the question is, was the increased reliance on technology seen also as an increased risk in terms of cybersecurity?
Yes, I can't remember the exact percentage, but the survey certainly showed that cybersecurity was one of the top risks. But it actually had moved down the list of risks that business leaders were assessing in the current year survey. But that's really because COVID-19 and the economic uncertainty had risen in the list. so other areas, and social unrest had risen up. So I think cybersecurity is not to be underestimated, because now we're all working on more digital platforms. Surely we are more exposed to cybersecurity, and I think that's an area that all businesses should be looking at for the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Leslie, just to add, one of my businesses was hit with a cyber attack recently, and they were shut down for 3 or 4 days. They had obviously a bribery email that said if you pay us £1 million, we'll unlock the encryption that had been loaded up to their systems. But they lost weeks of work. It set them back at a time that's very difficult. So it is happening all across the world all the time.
Yes, we've seen this in the cybersecurity research that we've done a couple of months back as well, where we surveyed IT professionals, and actually since the start of the pandemic, they have seen a rise in the threats and even in actual attacks since everyone started to work remotely. So definitely still a high one in terms of concerns. And I'm just looking at the statistics in the survey from this year compared to last year, and the number is actually quite similar. It's about 1 in 2 CEOs, so about 50%, that ranks cybersecurity as a concern and a threat to their business. So it probably stayed about the same in terms of in that respect. It's just like you said, Ralph, that there's other concerns now who are even more worrisome, and therefore it looks like it's gone down the ranking. But actually, it's very similar. I have 2 other questions, or a comment and a question that maybe relate to each other a little bit. So the question is, what was the biggest surprise from the survey results? Which personally I would answer with the rise in the risk for social instability that came from the 10th place or something all the way to the 5th place, with nearly 1 in 2 business leaders ranking it as a high concern. And the comment that we received from the audience is political diversity is a real area of attention for Western democracies. Now, we've seen the events happening the first week of January in the US, for example, with the riots at the Capitol. And Marco, I know that geopolitical unrest and uncertainty has been a topic on your mind as a CEO as well. Where, if we can identify the raise in concern for social instability as a key finding from the report this year, what do you make of that, and what do you get when you possibly speak with other CEOs about their views on social instability?
Look, it is surprising just to a certain level, because as a CEO, as a leader of an organization, you do need to have a good perspective of what's happening around, even beyond your own organization. It's incredible how social instability or geopolitical factors actually do impact our own businesses. So I think everybody kind of believes that 2021 is the year where the most risks will actually present themselves, because 2020 we were too busy dealing with the pandemic, especially at the beginning. We didn't know exactly what it was, how long it will last. Lockdown, yes, wasn't easy, but people didn't have a good idea of what was happening, so people were confused. Now people have a better idea of the situation, but on the top of that, now they feel probably that they're also a little tired of the situation at the same time. So these 2 things together, considering also the financial effects that 2021 might bring to many companies, especially probably micro businesses, but also mid-sized and large businesses, mostly on reshifting. But there will be an impact on the pockets of people. Think about small entrepreneurs, for example. you know, if you have had like a small restaurant, and then you come from like 4 months of lockdown, you know, it's very tough on you. Yeah, I mean, that's the time. And also the measures that governments have been putting in place, either they're going to end soon, or they are going to end soon. And then what happens afterwards? How long will it take to rebuild? So, you know, typically these periods of post-crisis are actually the ones that are, you know, riskier in this situation. For example, I give you like a comparison. I know, you know, after the communist era in let's say Eastern Europe, especially, then right after there were a lot of problems that they didn't used to have. So it took many countries a lot of time to adjust. There were things that were not common. So, you know, deriving from social instability, because everything was changing. So I think this will be a very, very interesting year on that side, and I do hope, like all of you, that this social instability will not be, you know, as big as you know, the concern that is shown in our survey. I hope this answers the question.
Yeah. Any additional thoughts from our other panelists before we wrap up our session?
The only other thing I'd add, Leslie, is that when you think about the pandemic and social unrest, there's two things that I think leaders become really focused on, as Marco said very well. One is the physical and mental and emotional health and well-being of their people, to make sure that they're doing well. And the other is communication. And I think for leaders to take advantage of dialing up their attention on those two things, so that there's a transparency of communication. What we have found is those leaders, those clients, those organizations that have done those things well have actually seen an increase in engagement with their clients and their people. So while it's very difficult, I think that perhaps again the bullish side of me, but to say that where a solution is well implemented, it can actually have very positive outcomes.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of our webcast today. Before we wrap up, I would like to thank all of the business leaders who took the time to speak with us through our research, both via the surveys as well as the interviews. We know that it's been a challenging time, and we really appreciate that you still took the time to speak with us. Thank you very much for that. To all of you who tuned in, we hope that the report brings you some positive news and insights that you can use to power your business recovery to become leaner, greener, and keener in 2021. By all means, please go and download the report from our website. And if you would like to discuss any of the findings or the issues raised in our report in more depth, then we very much welcome the opportunity to do so. So you can get in touch with us via our website. So that leaves me to say thank you very much to our panelists today, and have a very nice rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Lizzie. Bye.
Bye.